The first time most people saw the dog they stopped breathing. The second time they made sure they never saw him again. The bulldog lived in the back courtyard of the Valenti estate, thick stone walls all around, iron gates, olive trees twisted with age, and in the center of it all a patch of worn earth where his paws had chewed the ground into scars. His name was Bruno. No one called him that except the man who owned the house. To everyone else he was just the dog. The guards told stories about him during night shift, stories about the time he ripped a man's sleeve clean off for walking too close, about the time he snapped a training chain like it was paper, about the way his eyes glowed in the dark when headlights hit them just right. Bruno was big for a bulldog, all muscle and thick neck, jaws like a vice head, low chest, wide, a pale coat patched with darker spots and old mark scars that did not belong on an animal that should have been sleeping on a couch. He did not sleep on couches, he slept on concrete, under the open sky, under the watch of cameras and men who pretended not to be afraid. The only person who could walk within 2 meters of his chain without flinching was Marco Valenti. Marco was the kind of man whose name made bartenders stand up straighter, the kind of man who did not need to raise his voice because everyone in Miami already knew what happened when he did. No gold chains, no loud shirts, no cheap perfume, just dark suits, dark ink sliding up from under the cuffs, and eyes that felt like the ocean right before a storm. He inherited Bruno from another world, a world of back alley fights, underground cages, money passed in rolled bundles, men shouting over blood and sweat. The dog came with a reputation long before he came with a collar, untamable, unbreakable, and perfect. Marco had thought for a man who needed a monster that listened only to him, except Bruno did not really listen, not the way a normal dog might. He obeyed enough to be useful and dangerous enough to stand between Marco and anyone stupid enough to try their luck, but there was a line in him that refused to bend, something wild in the eyes, something that did not care about commands or whistles or treats. It intrigued Marco more than it bothered him. Men who bowed too easily were never truly loyal. Beasts that hid their fire were never truly safe. Better to know the monster you keep at your door every morning before sunrise. Marco walked the perimeter of his house, coffee in one hand, the other loosely by his side. He would end the walk in the courtyard where Bruno paced the edge of his chain. The dog always sensed him before the cameras did, head snapping up, ears twitching, a low rumble starting somewhere deep in his chest. Easy, Marco would say, voice low and calm. Bruno never wagged his tail, he never rolled over or licked his hand like a grateful pet. He just stared, eyes locked on the only man in the house who did not fear him. One morning Marco tossed a thick rope toward him. Bruno caught it midair, shook it so hard dust flew from the ground. The guards watching from the edge of the wall muttered to each other, "He is not right." One of them said, "Too mean." Another shook his head. "Boss likes him that way, maybe." But even Marco knew there were limits, lines you did not cross with a dog like that. No children in the courtyard, no staff wandering alone near the back gate, no drunk soldier cutting through after a party. The rules existed for a reason. So when Lorenzo Morello called one afternoon asking for a favor, Marco almost said no, purely out of instinct. Lorenzo was old school, hair, white suits, older than most of the kids working under him, eyes sharp even behind thick glasses, retired as much as men like him ever retired. He had paid his debts, kept his mouth shut, and faded into something like peace. He rarely asked for anything, so when he did, "You listen, my son and his wife are a mess," Lorenzo said over the phone. "They cannot agree on how to raise the girl, and they sure as hell cannot keep her safe around their own friends. I want her out of the house for a few weeks." Marco leaned back in his chair, watching the sky darken over the city through the office window. "You want me to babysit?" Lorenzo snorted. "You owe me worse than that, boy." A beat of silence hung between them, full of old nights and old blood. Marco exhaled slowly. "How old is she?" 8. Marco's jaw tightened. "No children in the courtyard, no children near the dog." He almost said it out loud, but Lorenzo kept talking. "She is quiet," the old man said. "She reads, she draws, you will not even notice her. I just need her somewhere your enemies will think twice about touching." The request sat heavy in Marco's chest. He imagined kids running through the halls laughing, tracking mud on polished stone. He imagined their noise echoing through rooms built for secrets, but he also imagined the look in Lorenzo's eyes, the one that never begged, only asked, with the weight of a man who had once saved you from a bullet. "Bring her tomorrow," Marco said at last. "Do not turn my house into a playground." Lorenzo chuckled. "When has your house ever been anything but a fortress?" That night Marco walked the courtyard again, the moon turning the stone pale, the air thick with the smell of night blooming flowers, and faint chlorine from the pool. Bruno paced, chain rattling softly. "We have a guest tomorrow," Marco said. "A little girl." The dog's ears flicked, a faint sound like a growl rolled up his throat. "She will not come near you," Marco promised. Bruno stared back, unblinking, as if he already knew that promises in this world had a way of breaking. The next day the estate woke earlier than usual. Mrs. Russo, the housekeeper, barked orders at the staff. "Fresh sheets in the guest room, no glass decor in the hall, hide the more frightening paintings." One of the younger maids whispered, "Frightening for who? This is Miami. Kids have seen worse on the news." Mrs. Russo shot her a look that shut her up instantly. Lorenzo arrived just after noon. His car rolled through the front gates, black Metal sliding open with a soft mechanical sigh. Marco waited on the front steps, hands in his pockets, sunlight baking the stone under his feet. The door opened. Lorenzo stepped out slowly, back stiff but proud. Then a small figure climbed from the back seat. The girl was smaller than Marco expected, brown skin warmed by the sun, dark hair pulled back into two uneven braids, a backpack almost bigger than her hanging off one shoulder. Her eyes were what stopped him. They were not wide and curious like most children. They were careful, taking in the house, the guards, the windows, measuring. Wang, come here, Lena, Lorenzo called gently. She walked up the stairs, not clinging to him, not hiding, just moving with that strange quiet intelligence some kids carry when they have already seen too much. This is Marco Valenti, Lorenzo said. You will stay here for a while? She nodded once. Thank you for letting me stay. Her voice was soft but steady. Marco studied her. You follow the rules, he said. You do not go anywhere alone without telling someone. You stay out of the back courtyard. You hear barking, you go the other way. Her brow creased slightly. There is a dog. Dangerous, Marco replied. A muscle moved in her jaw. I like dogs. This one does not like anyone. He said it flat, not as a threat, as a warning. She just nodded again, as if filing the information away. The afternoon passed in a blur of quiet adjustment, staff moving around the girl like she might shatter. Lorenzo staying for coffee, then leaving with a look thrown over his shoulder, the kind that said, take care of my blood or I will forget every favor I owe you. The house grew still after sunset. City lights blinked in the distance. The ocean breeze slipped through the slightly open windows. Marco sat in his office, papers spread on the desk, men sending updates through messages that lit his phone every few minutes. Deals, shipments, problems. He worked through them with the same steady focus he brought to everything until a sound slid through the quiet, a bark, short, sharp, then another, low and angry. Bruno. Marco frowned. The dog never barked without reason. He pushed back from the desk, stood, walked to the security panel on the wall. The courtyard camera showed grainy black and white stone shadows, movement near the center. Bruno straining against his chain, and something small near the gate. He swore under his breath no one was supposed to be back there. He grabbed his jacket on instinct, heart rate ticking up, not quite fear, not quite anger. He moved fast through the hall, past the kitchen where the night staff were cleaning, quietly past the glass doors that led to the covered pool. The barking grew louder as he stepped out into the warm night. Bruno pulled at the chain, eyes glowing in the low lights, teeth bared, and just inside the open side gate, bare feet on the stone, stood Lena. She was in a too big t-shirt that reached almost to her knees, her hair loose now around her shoulders. She had both hands held slightly out to her sides, palms empty. Her body was turned sideways, not squared up like a threat, not turned away like prey. Bruno lunged forward. The chain snapped tight, the sound of metal bit through the air. Do not move, Marco snapped. His voice cut across the courtyard like a whip. She glanced at him, just a quick flick of the eyes, then looked back at the dog. Hey, she said softly. It's okay. Her voice was low, and even no tremor. Bruno snarled, spit flying, paws digging into the dirt. Guards rushed toward the yard from the far side, guns at their backs. Hands out, boss, get her away from there. She ignored them. Her gaze stayed on the dog. I know you are scared, she whispered. The words barely reached Marco, but they did something to Bruno. The dog hesitated just for a second, the growl dipping in pitch. Lena took one step closer. Every muscle in Marco's body went tight. Kid, back away. She did not. Instead, she slowly lowered herself until she was sitting on the warm stone, cross-legged, small hands resting on her knees. She was still a good distance away, but closer than anyone ever sat on purpose. Bruno yanked at the chain, then stopped, ears flicking forward. You are not bad, she murmured. They just hurt you. Silence draped itself over the yard. Even the guards held their breath. The dog's breathing came in heavy bursts, chest heaving. Lena held out one small hand, not all the way, just a little. I remember, she said. Do you remember too? The words made no sense to Marco, but Bruno's reaction did. The big bulldog froze, eyes locked on her face. The chain rattled once more, a softer sound this time. Then slowly he lowered his massive head toward the ground. The growling stopped. The night opened. No one moved. Under the security lights, the Mafia boss watched the savage dog that obeyed no one sink down onto his belly. Inch by inch, Bruno crawled closer, until his head rested just inside the circle of light around the girl. Lena reached out and laid her hand gently on his scarred skull. The dog closed his eyes. Marco Valenti, a man who had seen men beg for their lives without blinking, felt something shift in his chest. Shock, yes, but something else too, something like recognition, like two broken things had just found each other again. Marco had seen impossible things in his life, deals that should have gone wrong but didn't, bullets that should have killed men but missed by a breath, storms that rose at the worst time then cleared as if the sky itself feared him. But he had never seen anything like what unfolded in that courtyard. The guard stood frozen, hands half lifted, unsure whether to pull the girl away or kneel to whatever miracle was happening. Bruno, the same dog who had nearly ripped through steel to break free, now lay perfectly still under the touch of a child, his massive chest rising and falling in slow measured breaths, as if he were afraid to disturb her. Marco stepped forward slowly, the gravel crunching under his shoes, his voice low. Lena, do not move. Bruno's ear twitched, but he did not lift his head. The girl did not even turn. She kept her palm on the dog, speaking so gently Marco could barely make out the words. It is okay, boy, you do not have to be scared anymore. No chains, no yelling, no hitting. Remember me? Marco frowned hard. Remember her? How could he remember her? Marco studied the courtyard, trying to make sense of something that made none. Then he saw it, the way Bruno's muscles loosened, the way he leaned into the child's small hand, as if he had been waiting years for that exact touch. Something old shifted beneath the surface. Marco looked at his head of security. Send someone to find Lorenzo Morello now. Tell him I need to talk to him immediately. The guard bolted. The others remained still, watching the scene with the kind of fear reserved for miracles and curses. Lena finally lifted her eyes toward Marco. She didn't smile, didn't look proud, didn't even look surprised. She just looked tired, like a child who had carried too much weight for too long. He knows me, she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. Marco shook his head. Impossible. Her hand stroked the dog's scarred neck. He remembers, she repeated, and for the first time, Marco didn't feel like the one in control. This was his home, his courtyard, his men, his rules, and yet everything bent around the small girl beside the beast. Bruno let out a low whine, almost soft, almost human, his entire body pressed closer to her. He looked like he might melt into her bare feet. Marco finally knelt beside them carefully. Bruno lifted his massive head toward Marco, eyes narrowed, muscles tightening, but Lena's hand slid along the side of his face, easing him back down. It is okay, boy. He is not going to hurt me, the dog obeyed without hesitation. Marco stared at the girl, calculating every detail. How old was she? 8, maybe 9, small, slight, fragile. How in hell did she calm a monster who shredded leather muzzles in minutes? Where did you meet him? He asked, voice quiet. Lena glanced down, her fingers brushing a faded scar near Bruno's collar. He was smaller than she whispered, and they were hurting him. Marco stiffened. The underground fight rings, he had seen them once as a younger man, dark basements reeking of blood, men placing bets, dogs shoved into cages, forced to fight for sport, for money, for ego. Bruno had come from a place like that. His previous owner had bragged about the dog's fighting history before. Marco put a stop to the man's breath entirely. Marco exhaled slowly, his mind racing. And you were there? He asked. Lena nodded, her jaw tightening. I used to sit with him when the men went outside. They didn't like him. He didn't like them either. They called him vicious and stupid. They said he was broken, but he wasn't. He was just scared. Marco felt something cold roll through him, a memory rising, children running in the background, dirty hands, small faces, loud noises, fear everywhere. And one little girl sitting alone near a trembling dog, whispering to him in the chaos. He pushed the image away, too dangerous, too close to a place he didn't visit anymore. Lena looked up suddenly, as if hearing his thoughts. Her eyes were steady, deeper than a child's eyes should ever be. He never forgot, she said softly. I didn't forget. Either. Marco swallowed something in his throat that felt too much like emotion before he could speak. Bruno suddenly lifted his head. Freezing stiff, he sniffed the air, low growl returning, vibrating through the stone. Marco tensed, guard shifted, ready, hands on holsters. Something was outside the courtyard. Marco stood instantly. Lena, get inside now. Bruno rose, two muscles rigid, teeth bared, but not at the girl, at something beyond the gate. Marco signaled his men silently. 3 rushed toward the perimeter, weapons drawn, scanning the shadows. The guard returned a moment later, breath fast. Boss, someone was watching the estate, someone near the back fence. Marco's eyes darkened. Show me the feed. They all turned toward the security monitor by the door. The camera footage flickered, showing a blurry outline slipping into darkness, tall male shape, moving too smoothly, too quickly, gone within seconds. Marco clenched his jaw. Someone had come close to his land. Someone had been near the courtyard where Bruno and now Lena stood. Someone who shouldn't have been brave enough to approach the Valenti estate. Marco's voice turned steel. Locked down the grounds, full sweep. No one enters, no one leaves. Bruno barked violently, pulling at the chain. His instincts sharpened, something older and deeper rising inside him. Lena grabbed his collar without fear. Hey, it is okay, you are safe, I am here. Her voice cut through the growl like a thread, turning a storm into quiet. The dog sat back down, pressed against her side, trembling but listening, always listening. Marco watched the scene, and something inside him shifted again. Something he had not felt since he was young. Protection, not possession, not power, real protection. Marco knelt again, facing the girl. Lena, look at me. She raised her head, eyes tired but unafraid. Tell me everything you remember about where you knew him. Tell me who was there. Tell me who might still be looking for him. She hesitated, then whispered one name, a name Marco recognized instantly, a name tied to a dirty ring of dogfighters who had disappeared years ago, a name tied to blood debt and old enemies. Marco felt a cold, slow understanding settle into place. Bruno's past had returned stronger than anyone expected, and the girl who had once saved him, the girl sitting cross-legged in his courtyard, now stood in the center of a threat that ran deeper than he thought. This was no coincidence. Someone had come for something or someone. Marco stood and gave the order that sealed everything. Keep the girl in the house at all times, no exceptions, and keep Bruno with her wherever she goes. The guards stared, stunned, but no one argued, because for The first time in the history of the Valenti estate the savage dog obeyed not the Mafia boss but the little girl who had once saved his life. The night settled over the Valenti estate like a heavy blanket, thick, warm but uneasy. Something moved beneath the quiet, something that made the guards walk faster and check their radios twice, something that made Bruno refuse to sleep, his massive head resting on his paws but his eyes wide open staring toward the back fence where the shadow had vanished. Inside the house, Lena sat at the long kitchen table swinging her feet under the chair, a cup of hot chocolate in her hands. Mrs. Russo hovered near the stove fussing without saying anything, her eyes always drifting to the courtyard door, as if waiting for news. Marco stood by the window watching the security monitors. Every few minutes he glanced back at the girl and the dog, both of them too calm for what had just happened. Lena finally broke the silence. Is someone coming for him? She asked, her voice soft. Mrs. Russo froze. Marco turned around slowly. Who do you think is coming? Lena stared into her cup. The steam fogged her glasses. I heard their voices before. They hurt him a long time ago. They wanted him to fight more. They wanted him to win more money. And when he wouldn't do what they wanted, they got angry. Marco crossed his arms and leaned against the counter, his face unreadable. And what happened then? She shrugged, a small motion so controlled it looked. Learned they hit him with things, sticks, chains, sometimes bottles, and when they left I stayed with him. The room went quiet again. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint scratch of Bruno shifting on the kitchen floor broke the silence. The dog slid closer to her, his entire enormous body curling around her chair like a guardian. Marco watched them both, thinking hard. The intruder, the name, she whispered. The dog's reaction, the scars on Bruno's body, pieces were lining up, pieces he did not like. Marco finally spoke. Tell me about the man. The one who ran the fights. Lena's grip tightened on the mug. He wore rings, big metal ones. His voice was loud and sharp, and he always laughed when the dogs bled. She didn't look at Marco when she said it. Her eyes were on Bruno, whose tail thumped once against the floor. I remember he had a tattoo on his hand, a black snake going around his thumb. Marco's jaw clenched. He knew exactly who that was, a man named Vico Moreno, someone who should have disappeared years ago, a man who survived by crawling into places too dirty for even the Mafia to touch, a man who worked with training, brutalizing, then selling dogs to the highest bidder. Someone had told Marco Vico died. Apparently someone lied. Marco exhaled long, steady and dangerous. This isn't a coincidence, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Vico doesn't show up near my property unless he wants something. Mrs. Russo looked terrified. What could he possibly want? Marco stared at Lena. The child didn't flinch. Bruno, he said quietly. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. Some men never let go of what they think belongs to them. Mrs. Russo made the sign of the cross under her breath, then marched toward Lena. Come, child, you should be in bed. But Bruno stood the moment Lena stood, blocking anyone who came too close. Mrs. Russo froze. Marco raised a hand. Leave them, he said quietly. Bruno is calmer when she is around. The housekeeper nodded and backed away. Lena placed her small hand on the dog's head and whispered something. He relaxed immediately. Marco watched the scene with something strange settling in his chest, not fear, not confusion, something deeper, instinct. Marco straightened. Listen to me, Lena, from now on you stay inside the main house. You do not go near the courtyard alone. And you tell me immediately if you see anyone you recognize from before. She nodded, obedient, but her shoulders tightened. What if they come back? She asked. Marco moved closer, his shadow falling across her. And the dog? They won't get past me, he said, and he meant it. That night Marco barely slept. He paced the estate, checking every camera, every blind spot, every gate. He called 3 different men searching for information on Vico Moreno, but the night gave nothing back except silence. The next morning the sun rose pink and soft across the sky, but the air felt wrong, heavy, charged, like a storm waiting to crack open. Bruno sensed it before anyone else. He prowled the house, staying glued to Lena's side, his nose twitching, his ears flicking at every sound. Lena followed Mrs. Russo into the dining room for breakfast. Marco sat at the head of the table reading a report, but his eyes lifted when they entered. Bruno padded in after them, muscles rolling under his thick coat. If he had been dangerous before now, he was a force of nature. Mrs. Russo placed a bowl of fruit in front of Lena. Eat, sweetheart. The girl picked up a strawberry. Bruno sat beside her, head hovering near her elbow, waiting. Marco raised an eyebrow. He wants one, she said quietly. Marco blinked. The savage monster wanted fruit, give it to him. She held out the strawberry. Bruno sniffed it, snorted, and ate it gently without using his teeth. The guards at the door stared wide-eyed, whispering about miracles and curses. Marco leaned back in his chair, watching more closely. This wasn't obedience, this was recognition, deep old loyalty. And then Marco noticed something else, the way Bruno's body suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the hallway, ears sharp. Marco straightened. What is it, boy? The dog growled low and steady. Lena's tiny hand found his collar. Someone is here, Marco said. Guards rushed through the hallway, radios crackling. A moment later one of Them sprinted into the dining room. Boss, there's a package outside the back gate. No one saw who dropped it. Marco stood instantly where behind the courtyard entry, the place closest to Bruno, the place where Vico would have left a message. Marco strode out of the house past the trees and stone steps toward the back gate. A small cardboard box sat neatly in the dirt, no markings, no address. Dangerous. He crouched and opened it cautiously. Inside was a collar, cracked leather, old dried blood staining the edges, and a note written in sloppy, uneven letters. You took what was mine. I want him back. Marco's eyes burned, cold fury rising up his spine. Vico wasn't coming for money. He wasn't coming for revenge. He was coming for Bruno. And if he found out the girl survived that place too, he would come for her as well. Marco crushed the note in his fist. Behind him a soft voice said, "Is that his collar?" Lena stood there barefoot, still holding a strawberry from breakfast. Bruno beside her, head bowed low as if he already knew what the collar meant. Yes, Marco said quietly, it belonged to him before I got him. Lena looked down at the collar, then up at Marco with eyes too steady for her age. He is not going back. Marco felt something heavy settle in his ribs. No, he said he isn't. Bruno growled again, his nose pointed toward the fence. And for the first time Marco understood something. The little girl hadn't changed the dog. She had awakened something in him, a memory, a bond, a loyalty stronger than fear. And the men who once hurt him, the men who once hurt her, were coming back to finish what they started. The sun had barely risen when the estate turned into a fortress. Guards tightening their patrols, cameras checked twice, radios buzzing with tension, the kind that made even the seasoned men keep their hands close to their weapons. Marco Valenti stood in the control room, staring at the cracked leather collar on the table in front of him, fingers pressed against the blood-stained edge. The ghosts of Bruno's past coiled around it like smoke. Vico Moreno was alive, and worse, he was hunting, and men like Vico never hunted alone. Marco looked at the monitors. One showed Bruno pacing inside the house, muscles coiled like steel under his coat, Lena walking beside him with soft small steps, her hand always within reach of his collar. They moved like they were tethered by something invisible, the girl speaking in low soothing murmurs, the dog responding with calm that defied every natural law. Marco turned to his security chief. Track every camera within a mile, any unusual movement, any car parked longer than 3 minutes, any face we have seen before. The man nodded, already typing commands into the system. The air felt too still, too ready, like the world had paused, waiting for something to break. Downstairs, Lena sat on the couch, hugging her backpack. Bruno sprawled beside her, his huge head resting heavily on her lap, the dog's eyes flickering every few seconds, scanning the room, scanning the windows, always searching, always waiting. Marco walked in quietly. Lena looked up at him with that calm, too old for her age. Will he come today? She asked. Marco didn't lie. Yes, and our job is to make sure you and Bruno stay safe. She nodded, her fingers slipping into the fur behind Bruno's ear. The dog's tail moved once heavy and slow. Marco studied her for a long moment. How did you get caught up in that place? He asked gently. She blinked, her gaze drifting somewhere far away. My mom worked late a lot, and I used to wander the alleys by the old market. One night I heard dogs crying and I followed the sound. Vico's men found me, but they didn't care about kids, so I kept sitting with the dogs every time they left them alone. Bruno was the only one who didn't bark at me. She stroked the dog's head. He was scared, but he never hurt me. Marco's throat tightened, anger simmering behind his ribs. A child had been safe in a pit of monsters only because a monster had chosen to protect her. He looked at Bruno. Bruno stared back, something dark and intelligent flickering in the dog's eyes. The radio on Marco's belt crackled. Sir, we found movement northeast side of the property, moving fast. Marco's entire body went rigid. Stay here, he ordered. He backed toward the door, then pointed at the dog. Bruno, stay. Everyone held their breath. Bruno stared at Marco, then backed up, pressing his body closer to Lena, refusing the command. Marco cursed under his breath. He had forgotten what he already knew. The dog obeyed, no one except her. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring leaves across the ground. Guards moved in formation, weapons drawn, checking corners, checking shadows, checking the fence line. Marco strode across the courtyard. When he reached the northeast gate, he saw it, a piece of wire freshly cut, hanging loose, the metal still warm. Someone had been there, and recently. The guard to his left swallowed hard. Boss. He got close, too close. Marco's jaw clenched. Get everyone to the south. Cameras now. They all moved quickly, every man falling into place, eyes scanning for movement inside the house. Lena lifted her head. Bruno's ears shot forward. She felt the shift before she heard it. Footsteps, too heavy, too fast. Suddenly a bang echoed through the back door. Bruno lunged to his feet, covering Lena with his body. She gasped, pressing into his side. Marco's voice roared from outside. Move to the main hall now. One of the guards sprinted in, grabbed Lena's arm. Come on, but Bruno blocked the man, teeth bared, snapping close enough to slice the air. The guard jerked back, hands raised. Easy boy, I am helping her. Lena shook her head. Bruno, come. He listened to her, instantly following her toward the main hall. The guard trailing behind. The lights flickered once, twice. Bruno growled so low the floor vibrated beneath them. Something was wrong, more wrong than before. Marco rushed in through the main entrance, eyes sharp, scanning every shadow. He spotted them. Lena pressed against the wall, Bruno in front of her, teeth exposed, every muscle locked. He hurried forward, but before he reached Then the fire alarm blared, shrill screaming, piercing high smoke seeped in from the west corridor, thin at first, then thicker, black like tar. Marco swore Vico was using smoke bombs, not fire, just panic, chaos, confusion. One guard shouted through the comms, "Boss, intruder on the west wing, masked, armed, moving toward the main hall." Marco's voice thundered, "Keep him away from the girl." Bruno's growl deepened. He stepped in front of Lena like a shield. The smoke curled around them and she coughed but kept her hand on his back. "It's okay, boy, I am with you." The dog lowered his head, ready to strike. Moments later, everything moved too fast. A dark figure emerged through the smoke, a tall man masked, holding a long baton, metal glinting through the haze. He didn't hesitate, he didn't speak, he moved straight toward Bruno. Bruno lunged, a flash of teeth, muscle, and fury. The man swung the baton, cracking it against Bruno's shoulder, but the dog didn't fall, didn't flinch. He threw himself again, jaws snapping inches from the man's wrist. Lena screamed, "Bruno, stop!" But it wasn't fear in her voice, it was instinct. The sound cut through the chaos. The dog hesitated 1 second, exactly 1 second, and that second saved her life. The attacker redirected the swing, aiming straight for her. Marco appeared from the smoke like a hammer from the sky, tackling the man full force. The baton clattered across the marble floor. The two men crashed against the wall, fists swinging, boots scraping, teeth bared like wild animals. Bruno barked violently, pacing, circling, trying to reach the man, trying to protect his girl. Lena cried out. Marco slammed the attacker into the wall once, twice, until the mask cracked, revealing a face. Marco recognized one of Vico's men, a foot soldier, loyal enough to die, stupid enough to try. Marco pinned him to the floor, snarling, "Where is Vico? Where is he hiding?" The man spat blood. "You can't protect them both, not the girl, not the mutt." Bruno erupted, snarling so violently 2 guards had to restrain him. Lena wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, pressing her cheek to his skull. "Stop, boy. I am okay, I promise." His body trembled, but he stopped. He listened, he obeyed her. Marco stood, chest heaving, hands shaking with rage. "Take him away alive." The guards dragged the attacker out, kicking and cursing. The smoke began clearing, revealing the full wreckage: overturned chairs, shattered glass, scorch marks on the floor. Marco knelt in front of Lena, his voice low. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, clutching Bruno with both hands. "He saved me," she whispered. Marco looked at the dog, then at the girl, then back at the dog. Something tightened in his chest, something sharp, something terrifying. He spoke quietly, but every man heard him. "From now on, that dog does not leave her side, not for 1 second." The guards nodded, no one questioned it. Marco stood slowly, staring at the smoke-stained walls, the broken mask, the way the air still vibrated with danger. Vico hadn't come for a warning, he had come to take back what he believed belonged to him, Bruno, and maybe even the girl, but he underestimated something powerful: the bond between a wounded child and a wounded beast. And Marco Valenti felt something cold settle into his bones. He would destroy the world before he let either of them be taken. The house was bleeding, smoke and fear. The alarms had quieted, but the echoes still clung to the walls. Every guard moved like their nerves were made of wire, rifles lifted, eyes sharp. No one spoke, unless they had to. The attack was not a warning, it was a promise. Vico Moreno was coming back. Marco Valenti stood in the center of the ruined hallway, staring at the cracked mask they had pulled off the intruder. In his chest something shifted, something old, something he thought he buried long ago. The moment he saw the attacker swing at Lena, he felt it, the sharp snap inside him, the instinct not of a mafia boss, not of a man in power, but something simpler and more terrifying, the instinct of a protector. And he had no intention of losing the girl or the dog. Lena sat on the leather couch in the study, hugging Bruno, who lay heavily against her, his massive head resting in her lap, bruised shoulder rising and falling in slow, painful breaths. The dog had taken the hit meant for her, and not even flinched. Marco entered the room quietly, but his presence filled the space like a thunderstorm. Lena looked up, her eyes red but steady. "Is Bruno okay?" Marco knelt beside them, letting his hand rest lightly on the dog's neck. Bruno huffed and nudged Marco's palm. "He will be fine," he said softly. "He's stronger than he looks." The girl nodded, brushing her fingers over the scarred fur. "I am sorry," she whispered. "He got hurt because of me." Marco shook his head firm. "No, he got hurt protecting you, because he chose to, because he remembers you, because you are the only person in his whole life who was ever kind to him. Sometimes kindness makes bonds stronger than blood." Bruno's tail tapped once against the carpet, as if agreeing. A guard knocked on the door. "Boss, we got what we needed." The intruder talked. Marco stood immediately, jaw tightening. "Bring me everything they found out." The guard hesitated. "It is bad, boss. Vico didn't just come back for the dog." Marco's voice dropped, cold and dangerous. "Say it. He wants the girl too," said the guard, his hand trembling. "He remembers her from years ago." Lena's breath hitched. Bruno growled, deep like thunder rippling under skin. Marco's eyes darkened. This changed everything. This wasn't just revenge, this was possession, this was obsession, this was a man coming after a child because he believed she was part of his property. Marco walked to his Desk slammed both hands onto the wood and ordered lockdown. Full lockdown. We're done waiting outside. The storm clouds rolled over Miami, thick, dark, heavy, the kind of weather that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Guard sealed the gates, cameras recalibrated, more men called in, armored cars arriving, headlights slicing through the dark. Lena stayed close to Bruno the entire time, the dog shadowing her every step, body tense, head always turned toward the door like he was ready to kill anything that moved too fast. Marco prepared for war. By midnight it arrived. A truck engine rumbled outside the back fence, headlights cutting through the rain. Guards lifted weapons, silhouettes moved behind the metal. The radio crackled, boss, they're here. Marco strode into the courtyard, long coat whipping in the wind. The gates rattled. Vico's voice cut through the storm. Marco Valenti, always dramatic. Bring me the dog and the girl and I walk away. Marco laughed without smiling. You must be dumber than your men said you were. Vico. The gate shook again, this time harder. Marco gave the order. Floodlights on the yard exploded with blinding white. The intruders froze, exposed weapons raised, faces twisted with cruelty and hunger, the kind that grew in people who lived their whole lives in the dark. Vico stood in the center, tall, gaunt, snake tattoo unmistakable around his thumb. His eyes crawled over the courtyard, searching. Where is she? Marco didn't answer. Bruno did. A roar tore from the hallway behind him. The kind of sound that had lived and died in underground pits, the kind of sound that made grown men step back without meaning to. Then through the doorway Lena appeared, her small hand gripping Bruno's collar. Bruno's body rigid, eyes locked on Vico. The world stopped. Vico smiled, twisted, ugly. There you are, little one, you and the mud are coming with me. Lena shook her head. No. Marco stepped forward, voice low, lethal. You are not touching her. You are not touching him. You are not leaving this place alive. Vico sneered, big words, Valenti, for a man hiding behind a child. Bruno snapped. The chain metal tore like paper. Every man jumped back, even Vico stumbled. Bruno stepped in front of Lena, muscles rippling, jaws open in a silent snarl. He didn't look like a dog anymore. He looked like justice, the kind that crawls out of hell for the people it loves. Marco lifted his hand, and his voice cut through the storm like a blade. Now the guards opened fire, not chaotic, precise, controlled bullets hit the ground around the intruders, forcing them back, forcing them down. Vico fired once wildly, then tried to run. Bruno charged faster than any guard could, aim faster than anyone could stop. The dog slammed into Vico, knocking him into the mud. The man screamed, the sound drowned in thunder. Bruno pinned him, teeth inches from his throat, growling a deep ancient sound. Vico's voice cracked, please call him off, call him off. Marco looked at Lena. The girl stepped forward, rain hitting her small face. She placed her hand gently on Bruno's head. The dog stilled, but he didn't move. He didn't release. Lena spoke softly, but every man hurt her. You hurt him for years. You hurt all of them. You hurt me. Vico stopped breathing for a second. Marco approached slowly, crouched beside the girl, his voice low, calm, proud. You decide, Lena. She didn't tell Bruno to attack. She didn't tell him to spare. She whispered one quiet command, enough, and Bruno obeyed fully, completely, like he had never obeyed anyone in his life. He stepped back slowly, never taking his eyes off Vico. 3 guards grabbed the man and dragged him away. Vico screaming about devils and curses and little girls who weren't human. The courtyard fell silent except for the rain. Marco looked at Lena. You saved him tonight. He said you saved all of us. Lena looked down at Bruno, then up at Marco, her eyes shimmering. No, he saved me first. Marco placed a heavy warm hand on her shoulder. And I will protect both of you for the rest of my life. The girl leaned against his side and Bruno pressed against both of them like he finally found the only home he ever wanted, and for the first time the estate felt lived in, safe. Whole. Thank you all for following this powerful story of loyalty, courage, and second chances. If Bruno and Lena's journey touched you even a little, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, which country, which city. Your support means everything, and it helps us keep bringing these deep emotional stories to life. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and remember, sometimes the most broken souls are the ones who protect us the hardest. See you in the next story.